I came home from a business trip to Arizona to find a tranquil meditation garden with bamboo fountains and stone pathways, sitting exactly where my storage barn used to be in my Lakewood, Colorado backyard. My name is Richard Ellis, and I had lived peacefully in the Meadowbrook Estates development for 3 years without incident. The storage barn held my tools, my late father's woodworking equipment, camping gear, and basically everything I needed for maintaining my property. Now it was just gone, replaced by this serene landscape that had absolutely no business being there. I stood in my backyard with my luggage still in one hand and my phone in the other, trying to comprehend what I was looking at. The meditation garden was actually quite beautiful, complete with a small koi pond, decorative rocks arranged in Zen patterns, and young maple trees planted in strategic locations. Someone had clearly spent serious money on this project. But it was on my property over my barn, and nobody had asked my permission. My first call was to my neighbor Tom, who picked up on the second ring. "Tom, what the hell happened to my barn?" There was an uncomfortable silence. "Oh man, Rick, you are going to lose your mind when you hear this." "I am already losing my mind. My barn is gone. There is a garden where it used to be." Tom sighed heavily. "The HOA came through about 4 days ago. Bunch of trucks, construction crew, the whole deal. They had that barn torn down in about 6 hours. Started building the garden the next day." "Did they say why? Did they have paperwork?" "They had some kind of permit thing they were waving around. Said it was approved by the board. Honestly, I thought you knew about it. I figured maybe you had agreed to something." I felt my blood pressure rising. "I have been in Phoenix for 2 weeks for work. Nobody contacted me about anything." "You should talk to Brenda," Tom said quietly. "She has been running the HOA board like a dictator lately. This whole meditation garden thing was her pet project." Brenda Morrison. Of course. She was the HOA president, a 52-year-old woman who treated our neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. I had managed to avoid most of her attention until now, mainly by keeping my property immaculate and following the rules. Apparently, that was not enough. I thanked Tom and immediately marched over to Brenda's house, which was 6 doors down from mine. She answered the door wearing a white linen outfit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, holding a glass of Chardonnay even though it was only 3 in the afternoon. "Richard, you are back from your trip. How wonderful. What did you do to my property, Brenda?" Her smile did not falter. "Oh, the meditation garden. Isn't not it lovely? The board decided that your storage barn was an eyesore that violated our community standards. We voted to have it removed and replace it with something that benefits everyone. That barn was on my property. You cannot just tear down my building without my permission." Brenda took a sip of her wine. "Actually, according to our HOA bylaws, we can. Section 12, Paragraph 4 states that any structure deemed detrimental to community aesthetics can be removed by board vote. We sent you notice via email 3 weeks ago." "I never received any email." "That is not our problem. We use the email address on file. If you do not check your messages, that is on you." I pulled out my phone and checked my email right there. Nothing. "What email address did you use?" She rattled off an address that ended in yahoo.com. "That is not my email. I have never used Yahoo. My email is Gmail, and it is on every document I have ever submitted to this HOA." Brenda shrugged. "Again, not our problem. We followed proper procedure. The meditation garden is a community amenity now. You should feel honored that it is on your property. It will increase everyone's property values." "Get off my porch," I said quietly. "Excuse me. You heard me. Get off my property, all of you, and remove that garden. You have 72 hours or I am calling my lawyer." Brenda laughed, actually laughed. Oh, honey, we have lawyers too. Much better ones than you can afford. Have a nice day. She closed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, shaking with anger before walking back to my house. This was not over, not even close. The next morning, I called out of work and drove to the county assessor's office in downtown Lakewood. I needed documentation proving that the storage barn was legally on my property within my property lines. The clerk, a helpful woman in her 60s named Margaret, pulled up my property records. Here you go, Mr. Ellis. Your lot is clearly marked. The structure you are referring to, that storage barn, was built in 1998 by the previous owner. It is well within your property boundaries, about 15 feet from the rear property line. Can I get copies of all this? Absolutely. I will print everything out for you. While Margaret printed the documents, I asked, have there been any recent surveys or changes to this property that I should know about? Not according to our records. The last survey was done when you purchased the home 3 years ago. Nothing since then. Armed with my property documents, I drove to a law office that Tom had recommended. The attorney, James Hoffman, was a sharp guy in his 40s who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. This is pretty egregious, James said after I explained the situation and showed him the photos I had taken. They demolished a permanent structure on your property without proper notice or your consent. The email issue alone is problematic for them. If they used the wrong contact information and you can prove your correct email was on file, their notification argument falls apart. What are my options? We sue them for the cost of replacing the barn, plus damages. We also file for an injunction forcing them to remove the meditation garden from your property immediately. This is pretty clear-cut trespassing and destruction of property. How long will this take? The injunction hearing can happen quickly, maybe within 2 weeks. The full lawsuit will take longer, probably 6 months to a year depending on how much they fight. Let us do it, all of it. James smiled. I like your attitude. Let me draft the paperwork. We will have them served by end of week. I left his office feeling slightly better. At least I was taking action. But when I got home, I found something new that made my blood boil all over again. There was a sign posted near the meditation garden that read, Meadowbrook Estates Community Meditation Garden, HOA members welcome open dawn to dusk. They were advertising it, inviting people to use my backyard as a public space. I took photos of the sign, sent them to James, and then went inside before I did something I would regret. Over the next few days, I watched from my kitchen window as various neighbors wandered into my backyard to enjoy the meditation garden. Most of them seemed uncomfortable when they saw me watching, but a few gave me friendly waves like this was completely normal. On Thursday afternoon, Brenda herself showed up with 2 other women I recognized from the HOA board. They arranged themselves on the stone benches and started doing what appeared to be yoga poses. In my backyard, on my property. I grabbed my phone and recorded the whole thing from my window. James had told me to document everything, and I was taking that advice seriously. After about 20 minutes, the women finished their session and started walking back toward the front of my house. That was when I stepped outside. Brenda, you are trespassing. She barely looked at me. This is a community amenity, Richard. We have every right to be here. This is my private property. You have no right to be here without my permission. One of the other women, whose name I think was Patricia, spoke up. You are being incredibly selfish about this. The meditation garden is for everyone's benefit. Then build it on HOA common land, not my backyard. There was no suitable location on common land, Brenda said. Your barn was ugly and your backyard was the perfect spot. The board voted, Democracy in action. You cannot vote to take someone's private property. That is not democracy, that is theft. Brenda's expression hardened. We will see what the courts say about that. You should know that we are also assessing you a $15,000 fine for your hostile attitude toward this community improvement project. On what grounds? Failure to cooperate with HOA improvement initiatives. It is in the bylaws. You are insane, and you are fined. You will receive official notification tomorrow. They walked away, leaving me standing in my own backyard feeling like I was losing my mind. When the fine letter arrived the next day via certified mail, I immediately forwarded it to James. His response was swift. This is harassment. Adding this to the lawsuit, they are digging themselves deeper. The injunction hearing happened 12 days later at the Jefferson County Courthouse. James had prepared thoroughly, and we had a mountain of evidence. Property records, photos of the barn before its destruction, proof that my correct email address had been on file with the HOA for 3 years, the ridiculous fine letter, videos of Brenda and others treating my property as public space. The HOA's lawyer was a slick guy named Martin Chen, who represented half the HOAs in the Denver metro area. He argued that the bylaws gave the board broad authority over property aesthetics, and that proper notice had been provided to the email address on file. James destroyed that argument by showing that every other correspondence from the HOA over the past 3 years had gone to my correct Gmail address. The Yahoo address had never been used before, was not on any of my membership documents, and had conveniently appeared in their records just before they sent the demolition notice. Your Honor, James said, this is a transparent attempt to circumvent notification requirements. They used a fake email address to create plausible deniability while they destroyed my client's property. Judge Rebecca Morrison, no relation to Brenda as far as I knew, listened carefully to both sides. She was a stern woman in her late 50s who had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. Mr. Chen, do you have any explanation for why this Yahoo email address was suddenly used when all prior correspondence went to a different address? Martin Chen fumbled through his papers. There must have been a clerical error, Your Honor. These things happen. A conveniently timed clerical error. How fortunate for your clients. The judge did not sound amused. And you are arguing that your clients had the right to demolish a permanent structure on Mr. Ellis's property based on a bylaw about aesthetics. Yes, Your Honor. The bylaws clearly state. I have read the bylaws, Mr. Chen. They state that the HOA can require modifications to structures deemed aesthetically problematic. That means paint colors, repairs, maintenance. It does not grant authority to demolish private property without consent. If you can find me a single Colorado precedent suggesting otherwise, I would love to see it. Martin Chen looked uncomfortable. I will need to research that, Your Honor. I suspect you will not find one because it would violate basic property rights. Here is my ruling. The meditation garden must be removed from Mr. Ellis's property within 30 days. The HOA will restore the land to its previous condition at their expense. Mr. Ellis will be granted access to pursue damages in civil court. This injunction is granted. We are adjourned. I wanted to jump up and cheer, but I maintained my composure until we got outside the courtroom. James shook my hand with a genuine smile. That went extremely well. Judge Morrison basically eviscerated their arguments. Now we focus on the damages lawsuit. How much can I claim? The barn's replacement value, which based on the photos and dimensions appears to be around $35,000. Legal fees, which are adding up quickly. Emotional distress. Trespass damages. We are probably looking at a total claim of around $80,000. Will I actually get that much, based on today's hearing? I think we have a strong chance. They committed such clear violations that any jury will side with you. Over the next 30 days, I watched with satisfaction as the HOA hired a crew to remove the meditation garden. The koi pond was drained and demolished. The stone pathways were torn up. The young trees were transplanted elsewhere. The bamboo fountains were carted away. It took almost 3 weeks to clear everything and return the space to bare dirt. Brenda drove by my house multiple times during this process, glaring daggers at me from her Mercedes. I waved cheerfully each time. Tom told me that she had been ranting at HOA meetings about my lawsuit, calling me selfish and threatening to make my life miserable. She is talking about doing surprise inspections of your property. Tom warned me over beers in his garage. Looking for any violation she can find. Make sure everything is perfect. My property is always perfect. That is why they had to make up a reason to go after my barn. Just be careful, man. Brenda does not let things go. Tom was right. 2 weeks after the meditation garden was removed, I received a notice that my mailbox was 3 inches too tall according to HOA standards and needed to be replaced within 10 days. Then my front door wreath was deemed too large. Then my garden hose, which was coiled neatly beside my garage, was supposedly visible from the street and violated aesthetic guidelines. Every violation came with a $500 fine. I documented everything and sent it all to James. "This is clearly retaliatory," he said during our phone call. "We are adding harassment to the lawsuit. Keep following their ridiculous demands for now so they cannot claim you are violating the bylaws, but save every receipt. They are going to pay for all of this." The civil trial was scheduled for 8 months after the initial incident. During that time, the harassment continued. Brenda found 23 different violations on my property. My grass was supposedly 1/4 inch too long. My car was parked 4 inches over the edge of my driveway. My recycling bin was visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though it was exactly where the sanitation company required it to be. I complied with everything, fixed every bogus violation, and kept meticulous records. The fines totaled over $11,000, which I refused to pay. James assured me this was the right move. Let them try to place a lien on your property. It will just make them look worse in court. The really interesting development came about 5 months in, when I received a call from another homeowner in the development. Her name was Carol Owens, and she lived on the other side of Meadowbrook Estates. "Mr. Ellis, I heard about what happened with your barn. I wanted you to know that the HOA did something similar to me 2 years ago. They tore down my greenhouse without permission, said it violated setback requirements. I could not afford a lawyer at the time, so I just let it go. But if your case goes to trial, I would be willing to testify about what they did to me." This was huge. "Carol, that would be extremely helpful. Would you be willing to speak with my attorney?" "Absolutely. Brenda Morrison has been a nightmare for this neighborhood." It is time someone stood up to her. James was thrilled when I put him in touch with Carol. This establishes a pattern of behavior. They have done this before. That is going to be very persuasive to a jury. As the trial date approached, 2 more homeowners came forward with similar stories. One had their shed demolished without consent. Another had their fence torn down and replaced with one the HOA preferred, then was billed for the work. None of them had the resources to fight back at the time, but they were all willing to testify now. By the time we entered the courtroom for the civil trial, James had built an overwhelming case. The trial lasted 4 days and was held at the Jefferson County Courthouse in downtown Golden, Colorado. I had taken the entire week off work, and my employer was supportive since they thought the whole situation was outrageous. The first day was mostly procedural, with jury selection and opening statements. The jury was made up of 8 people, a mix of men and women, homeowners and renters, ranging in age from late 20s to early 60s. They looked like reasonable people, which gave me hope. James's opening statement was powerful. He laid out the timeline of events, the fake email address, the destruction of my barn, the harassment campaign, and the pattern of similar behavior with other homeowners. Martin Chen's opening statement tried to portray the HOA as well-meaning volunteers trying to maintain property values, painting me as an unreasonable homeowner who refused to cooperate with reasonable requests. The second day was when I testified. James walked me through everything that had happened, and I answered clearly and honestly. Martin Chen's cross-examination tried to make me seem difficult and uncooperative, but I stayed calm and factual. Mr. Ellis, is not it true that you have filed complaints about HOA board decisions on multiple occasions? I filed one complaint about a proposed assessment increase that violated the bylaws. The board backed down because I was right. So you have a history of opposing the board. I have a history of expecting them to follow their own rules. The jury seemed to respond well to that. Several of them nodded. The third day brought Carol Owens and the other homeowners to the stand. Their testimonies were devastating to the HOA's case. Carol broke down crying when describing how she had spent years building her greenhouse, growing vegetables for her disabled son, only to have it demolished while she was visiting him at a medical appointment in Denver. They said it was ugly, she said through tears. My son's greenhouse. They called it ugly and they tore it down. I saw several jury members wipe their eyes. Martin Chen tried to object to the emotional testimony, but Judge Anderson, who was presiding over the civil case, allowed it. The witness is describing her experience with the defendant organization. Her emotions are relevant to the damages claimed. Overruled. Brenda testified on the 4th day and it went poorly for her. She was defensive and combative, refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing. When James asked her about the fake email address, she insisted it was a clerical error, but could not explain how it happened or who entered it into their system. Is not it convenient, Mrs. Morrison, that this clerical error occurred right before you demolished Mr. Ellis's barn? It was a coincidence. And is not it also convenient that every other piece of correspondence over 3 years went to his correct email address? I do not control the day-to-day administrative tasks. But you are the HOA president. You approved the demolition. Did you verify that Mr. Ellis had actually been notified? I trusted that proper procedures had been followed. Did you personally see proof that he had been notified? Brenda hesitated. No, but I assumed. So you authorized the destruction of a $35,000 structure on someone's private property based on an assumption. We followed the bylaws. The bylaws do not grant you the authority to demolish private property without consent, do they, Mrs. Morrison? They grant us authority over aesthetic standards. That is not what I asked. Do the bylaws specifically state that you can demolish a homeowner's structure without their permission? Brenda's face flushed red. Not in those exact words, but the implication, yes or no, Mrs. Morrison. No, but thank you. No further questions. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. I spent that time in a conference room with James, trying not to climb the walls with anxiety. When we were finally called back, my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The jury foreman, a middle-aged man who worked in construction, stood up when the judge asked if they had reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor." "What say you? In the matter of Ellis versus Meadowbrook Estates HOA, we find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts." I felt my knees go weak. James grabbed my arm to steady me. The foreman continued. "We award damages as follows. Replacement cost of the storage barn, $38,000. Legal fees, $47,000. Compensation for harassment and emotional distress, $50,000. Punitive damages for willful and malicious conduct, $150,000. Total damages awarded, $285,000. I could not breathe. $285,000. James was grinning beside me. Behind us, I heard Brenda gasp. Judge Anderson addressed the jury. "Thank you for your service. This case is concluded. The HOA is ordered to pay the full amount within 60 days. Court is adjourned." Outside the courthouse, James shook my hand enthusiastically. "That punitive damages number is massive." The jury wanted to send a message. They were clearly outraged by what the HOA did. "I cannot believe it. Believe it. You just won big. And here is the best part. The HOA's insurance probably will not cover punitive damages or damages arising from intentional misconduct. That is coming straight out of their reserves, which means every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates is going to see a special assessment to cover this." I felt a moment of guilt about that. I do not want to hurt my neighbors. You did not do this. Brenda Morrison and her board did this. The homeowners will know exactly who to blame. This might actually be the best thing that ever happened to that neighborhood if it leads to new leadership. James was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I heard from multiple neighbors who were furious about the verdict and the coming assessment. Not furious at me, but at Brenda. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and I attended along with probably 80% of the development's residents. Brenda tried to maintain control, but the crowd was not having it. Person after person stood up and demanded her resignation. Tom made an impassioned speech about how the board had betrayed the trust of homeowners and turned the HOA into a personal fiefdom. Carol Owens spoke about her greenhouse and how she had been too scared to fight back. Richard Ellis did what I could not do. He stood up to them. And now we all know the truth about how this board operates. They need to go, all of them. The vote to remove the entire board was nearly unanimous. Brenda tried to argue, tried to defend her actions, but she was shouted down. When the final count was announced, she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the meeting without another word. I never saw her at another neighborhood function again. According to Tom, she put her house on the market within a month. A new board was elected that night, with Tom as president. One of his first acts was to establish clear guidelines requiring homeowner consent before any HOA action affecting private property. He also created an appeals process for violations and limited fines to reasonable amounts for legitimate issues. The HOA paid my judgment in full within the 60-day window. A special assessment of $3,000 per household was levied to cover it, which caused some grumbling, but most people understood it was necessary. The check arrived via certified mail with no note, no apology, just the payment. I used part of the money to hire a contractor to rebuild my storage barn. The new one was actually nicer than the original, with better insulation, LED lighting, and a more efficient layout. The contractor, a guy named Dave who had done work in the neighborhood before, shook his head when I told him the story. I heard about that meditation garden thing. Everybody in the construction community was talking about it. The crew that did the demolition felt terrible. They were told it was all approved and legal. They had no idea they were tearing down your barn without permission. Not their fault. They were hired to do a job. Still, it was messed up. This new barn is going to be rock solid. I am making sure of that. Dave was true to his word. The new barn was completed in 3 weeks and looked fantastic. I moved all my father's woodworking equipment back in, organized my tools, and felt a genuine sense of peace having that space back. About 6 months after the trial, I was working in the barn on a Saturday afternoon when Tom knocked on the door. He had a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses. Thought we should properly celebrate your new barn. We sat on the workbench and poured drinks. The autumn sun was streaming through the barn's windows, and everything felt right with the world. "You know," Tom said, "that whole nightmare with Brenda and the board actually turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to this neighborhood. The new board is actually functional. We are handling real issues instead of made-up violations. People are not scared of their HOA anymore. I am glad something good came from it. More than glad. You stood up when it mattered. A lot of people would have just accepted it and moved on. I could not let them get away with it. Not with my dad's stuff. That barn meant something to me." Tom raised his glass. "To standing your ground, to standing your ground." We drank, and I felt a sense of closure that had been missing. The legal battle was over. The barn was rebuilt. The neighborhood was healing. Brenda was gone, probably terrorizing some other community by now. But there was one more piece to the story that came about 8 months later. I was home on a Wednesday evening when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Ellis. This is Detective Sarah Martinez with the Lakewood Police Department. I am calling regarding the Meadowbrook Estates HOA case you were involved in." My stomach dropped. "What about it?" "We have been investigating some financial irregularities related to the former HOA board. During our audit, we discovered that the funds used to build that meditation garden on your property were not properly authorized. In fact, they appear to have been embezzled from the HOA reserves." "Embezzled?" "Yes, sir. It looks like Mrs. Morrison and 2 other board members created false invoices and diverted approximately $75,000 for personal use over the past 3 years. The meditation garden project was partially funded with embezzled money, though they also used legitimate HOA funds." I sat down hard on my couch. "So they destroyed my barn with stolen money?" "Partially, yes. We are building a criminal case against Mrs. Morrison and the other board members involved. I wanted to let you know because you may be called as a witness if this goes to trial." "Absolutely. Whatever you need." "Thank you, Mr. Ellis. We will be in touch." I immediately called Tom to tell him. He was shocked but not entirely surprised. That explains how they afforded such an elaborate garden. The budget they showed us seemed low for what they built. They must have been using embezzled funds to make up the difference. This is insane. This is Brenda. She probably thought she would never get caught. Your lawsuit exposed everything. The criminal case moved forward over the next year. Brenda Morrison and 2 other former board members, Patricia Jennings and Michael Foster, were charged with embezzlement, fraud, and misappropriation of funds. The evidence was overwhelming. They had created shell companies, submitted false invoices for work that was never done, and systematically looted the HOA reserves. The meditation garden was just one piece of a much larger scheme. They had been stealing for years, padding their own pockets while pretending to serve the community. The total amount embezzled was determined to be over $200,000. I testified at the criminal trial about the meditation garden and the civil lawsuit. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Cruz, used my case as an example of how brazen the defendants had become. "They did not just steal money," she told the jury. "They destroyed private property with those stolen funds. They used embezzled money to fund their pet projects while lying to homeowners about where the money was going. This was not careless bookkeeping. This was deliberate, systematic theft. The jury convicted all 3 defendants on all counts. Brenda Morrison was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Patricia Jennings got 3 years. Michael Foster got 2 years plus probation. They were also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, though most of the money was already gone, spent on luxury vacations, cars, and home renovations. I attended the sentencing hearing and watched as Brenda was led away in handcuffs. She looked older, diminished, nothing like the imperious HOA president who had demolished my barn. When she walked past me, she did not make eye contact. Outside the courthouse, Carol Owens approached me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for not backing down. If you had not fought them, none of this would have come to light. They would still be stealing and destroying people's property. I just wanted my barn back. You got justice, for all of us." That night, I sat in my storage barn surrounded by my father's woodworking tools and thought about everything that had happened. It had been a long, exhausting battle. 2 years from the moment I came home to find my barn demolished to watching Brenda Morrison sentenced to prison. But it was worth it. Every frustrating moment, every piece of paperwork, every court appearance. I had stood up for what was right and refused to let bullies steamroll me. The barn was rebuilt, better than before. The neighborhood had new leadership that actually served homeowners instead of exploiting them. And 3 criminals who had been stealing from their neighbors were finally held accountable. I ran my hand along the smooth wood of my father's old workbench, the one that had survived the demolition because I had lent it to Tom. My father had built this with his own hands, taught me how to use it, passed on his love of craftsmanship. The HOA had tried to destroy that legacy, but they failed. The barn stood solid and secure. The legal bills had been paid, and I could finally, truly, breathe easy in my own home. Tom organized a neighborhood barbecue a few weeks later to celebrate what everyone was calling the HOA Renaissance. About 40 families showed up, filling the common area near the neighborhood entrance with grills, lawn chairs, and kids playing. It was the first time in years that people seemed genuinely relaxed and happy to be part of the community. Someone had made a banner that said, "Welcome to the new Meadowbrook Estates," and hung it between 2 trees. Tom gave a short speech about the new board's vision for transparency and accountability. People actually applauded. I was flipping burgers when a younger couple approached me. I recognized them as living a few streets over, but we had never really talked. "You are Rick Ellis, right?" the husband said. "I am Jason, and this is my wife, Linda. We just wanted to thank you for what you did. We moved here 2 years ago, and the old HOA was making us miserable. Constant fines for ridiculous things. We were actually considering selling and leaving." Linda nodded. "Your lawsuit changed everything. We can actually enjoy our home now." "I am glad it helped." "It did more than help," Jason said. "You saved this neighborhood." I did not know about saved, but I understood what he meant. Fear had been replaced with community. That was worth something. As the sun set over the Colorado foothills and people laughed and ate and enjoyed themselves, I thought about how strange life could be. A business trip to Arizona had turned into a 2-year legal odyssey that exposed corruption, sent criminals to prison, and transformed a neighborhood. All because someone tore down my storage barn. The barn that now stood stronger than ever in my backyard, filled with my father's legacy and my own determination to never back down from what was right. I finished grilling the burgers and joined Tom and a group of neighbors who were swapping stories about the old HOA's ridiculous violations. Everyone had their own horror story, their own encounter with Brenda's petty tyranny. But now those stories were told with laughter instead of anger, wounds that had finally healed. "Remember when she tried to find the Johnsons because their dog was the wrong color?" someone said. "She said brown dogs were aesthetically displeasing. What about when she measured everyone's lawn gnomes to make sure they were under the 8-inch height limit? There is a lawn gnome height limit. There was under Brenda. Not anymore." The stories went on for hours, each more absurd than the last. It was cathartic, this communal processing of shared trauma. And through it all, I felt a deep satisfaction knowing that I had played a part in ending it. Around midnight, after everyone had left and I was cleaning up my backyard, I walked over to the storage barn one more time. I opened the door and turned on the lights, looking at my father's tools neatly arranged on the walls. The smell of wood and oil and sawdust filled the air. This was what I had fought for, not just the physical structure but what it represented. The right to have your property respected, the right to stand against those who abuse power, the right to justice when you have been wronged. I locked the barn door and headed inside, tired but content. Tomorrow I would go back to work, back to my normal life. But I would always know that when it mattered, when I was pushed to the edge, I had pushed back harder. The HOA had built a meditation garden over my storage barn. I had rebuilt it and sent them the legal bills. And in doing so, I had changed everything. As I fell asleep that night, I thought about Brenda Morrison sitting in a federal prison somewhere, probably still convinced she had done nothing wrong. I did not feel sorry for her. She had made her choices and now faced the consequences. That was how justice worked. The neighborhood was better without her. The HOA was better without her. And my barn stood tall and strong, a testament to what happens when regular people refuse to be pushed around. In the end, that was the real victory. Not the money, not the court case, not even the satisfaction of watching corrupt officials go to prison. It was the simple fact that I had stood my ground, fought for what was mine, and won. My father would have been proud. I knew that with certainty as I drifted off to sleep, the Colorado night quiet and peaceful outside my window. The barn was rebuilt, the bills were paid, and justice finally had been served.